Hey everybody, Kenneth Raymond here, and in this time-lapse episode we're going to cover filming the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail, well, what is the Holy Grail? Well, the Holy Grail is a time-lapse method in which we're shooting during the sunrise or the sunset, and we're having to make adjustments to the camera to compensate for the changing of the light. And I don't know how well you can see it on your screen, but there's all kinds of flickering going on and all kinds of light spikes, and each of those light spikes is where I made a shutter adjustment on the camera to compensate for that changing of the light. And we're going to use LRTimelapse and Lightroom together to compensate for that changing of the light and smooth out those transitions. If you haven't seen it yet, in the first episode I cover all the processing basics of LRTimelapse and Lightroom. There's a link down below if you'd like to check it out. So let's jump in and get right to work. So we hit the keyframe wizard, and LRTimelapse will set some keyframes based upon what it thinks our changes need to happen, and then we'll hit the Holy Grail wizard. Let's go back to full screen. I like full screen a lot better. The Holy Grail wizard is going to recognize where we made our shutter changes, and it's going to drop a couple keyframes onto each, and it's going to compensate through the sequence for those changes, as you can see here with this orange line, this blue line, and all these spikes represent the changing of the light and our camera setting changing. You can see here at the end, it really takes a dip downward because, again, it's a sunset and it was getting dark. And the Holy Grail wizard recognizes this and automatically initiates some changes through the sequence to compensate for that. And you can make all kinds of adjustments here if you like, depending on what your sequence calls for. We're going to leave that there by itself. Hit save. That's going to write all the XMP data that Lightroom is then going to read as we adjust everything. We'll open up Lightroom, move that down here. Better yet, we'll move that down there. Then we'll open up Lightroom, and we'll somehow, without me getting confused, we're going to take this and drag it right into Lightroom. How about we do that? Drop it in there in the library module. And then it'll work to import everything. Once it's populated, we hit import and everything comes in. We'll come down here and using our filters, we're going to select LRTimelapse keyframe and Holy Grail. And as we learned in the first episode, LRTimelapse sets our keyframes and it's represented in Lightroom as a 4-star filter. The Holy Grail keyframes, it sets them as 2 and 3. And 2 is the frame or the image just before a shutter change, and a 3-star is right at the shutter change. We go into the development module, and let me make this a little bigger so we can see our ratings. We can click on 2, which is at the shutter change. 3 is the shutter change, and where there should have been a change, a jump in light, hit I to bring up the info. We can see our shutter speed. So before the adjustment, I was at 1/5 of a second. After the adjustment, I was at 1/4 of a second, and you can see there's virtually no difference in the exposure because LRTimelapse has already made the adjustment for us. And we can go through the sequence and see that's true with each shutter speed adjustment. But enough about that. Let's process this out really quick. Oh, wrong button. We want only our standard LRTimelapse keyframes. Let me get it right here. Try this one more time. There we go. And just like in the first video, let's turn off that info. We're going to adjust this first photo, and then we'll apply those adjustments to the next photo, and so on and so forth until we get everything adjusted. Then we'll be back in LRTimelapse for balancing out and transitioning those changes for us. We're going to do this really quick. I'm not going to cover a whole lot of the processing because we do that in the first video. So I'm going to run through just very, very quick. in a sunset. I'm going to start out as cloudy for the temperature preset. Like always, turn down the highlights, turn up the shadows. We'll adjust the white point real quick, adjust the black point real quick. Moving down, we'll add some clarity, add some vibrance, and maybe a little more vibrance, a little saturation. Come back up. This one seems to be a little bright, so we're going to turn down the exposure just a little bit of contrast. Moving down to our next stop, which is noise and sharpening. Noise shouldn't be too bad on this because we didn't get too long of an exposure yet. Holding down Alt or Option on a Mac, we'll bring it up until we don't see any little speckles of grain. That looks good. I'm going to sharpen this to about 40 or so. Typically on a time-lapse film, I don't sharpen above 40. Hold down Alt or Option on your Mac until we take the sharpening out of the sky, because we don't want to force the detail of noise back into our sequence. That looks good for me. We'll close that. And I think it needs to be just a little bit warmer for my liking. Yeah, that looks good. And then when the first one's selected, we'll hold Control or Command on a Mac and select the one next to it. Go up top to Scripts, sync the keyframes, and then those adjustments will be applied to the next keyframe photo. And I'm thinking that looks a little bright. Let's check the white point real quick, because sometimes we need to tweak. And the black point. I'm going to bring the exposure down just a little bit more, just to my liking. Again, this is an artistic choice. There is no rule of thumb or laws that you have to stick to. So we'll click out, make sure that one's only selected. Then we'll select that one again, hit Script, and sync them. Take a look at that one. And that one's looking a little bright now. So we're going to bump it down just a little, because again, this is all about artistic choice, and I think we need to warm it up just a little. I think it's getting a little too cool for my liking. There, I like that. And again, we'll highlight the one next to it. Sync it again. Look at that one. See, our lights are starting to come on now. And I'm looking at the sky, and I'm going to back it down just a little bit, because again, it was a little bright for me. And that's about all we're going to adjust there. Select the one next to it again and sync. Take a look at it. What do we need? I think it needs to be just a touch darker again. I like that. Click out. Select the one next to it. Sync it. And again, it's still a little bright, especially the sky, for my liking. And I like that. You know what? Before we move on, I'm going to check the white point again. We may have to tweak it, and we do. So bring that down just a little. There we go. I like that. We'll double check the black point. We can leave that alone. And then we'll select the next keyframe photo. Sync it. Have a look at it. And do we like it? So there's our first one. There's our next one. I'll come back. There's our last one. It looks like it's a little saturated for my liking, so we'll back it down just a little. I think we're going to back that one down just a little. And I think we're happy with that. That's our first one in the sequence. That's our last. That's a good starting point for us. So we'll select all of those, go back to Library, Metadata, save metadata to files, and we'll open LRTimelapse again. Then we'll reload everything, and LRTimelapse is going to read all the changes from Lightroom that we just did. And you can see here there's some adjustments in our keyframe photos, the ones that we did adjust. And now we're going to hit auto transition, and it's going to read everything, and it's going to calculate all the changes that need to be made for each frame, for each image, beginning to end. It's going to automatically apply all those. We're going to hit save to write everything into XMP again. Then we're going to hit the visual previews button, and that's going to build our sequence preview for us. That's going to take a couple minutes. I'll put it on pause and pick it up when it's done. And our previews have finished generating. Let's hit the play button and see how we did, how it looks so far. You can still see there's all kinds of flickering, but that's all right because LRTimelapse is going to fix that for us. That's the magic sauce, if you will, with LRTimelapse. That's where it really excels. I've tried all kinds of different apps and programs and whatnot for achieving this holy grail, and LRTimelapse is the best one by far that I have found, and why I use it so religiously. Let's have another look-see. Looks like our camera didn't move at all either, as windy as what it was, and all the hand touching I had to do on the camera for the shutter adjustments through the whole sequence. And that's something that I have to mention, is the need for a strong, sturdy tripod, especially for the Holy Grail, because you're going to be making adjustments on the camera. When I say sturdy, I use a 14-pound Davison Sanford with a giant fluid head mounted on a ball socket because I don't want anything to move at all. There are apps that we could use on our phone and tablet for automatically making the adjustment for us, but that adds in the potential for app crash in the middle of the sequence, and then we're just done and lost and have to restart. And it may have just been something so special that there is no redoing it. So for myself, I prefer to do it all by hand. Look at this one more time. And I think I'm happy with it. I don't think we have to make any more adjustments to it back in Lightroom, and that's a good thing. So when that's done winding out, yep, I'm happy with the changing of the light and all the adjustments we did. We'll hit Visual Deflicker. And this adjustment is what is going to smooth out all those flickering transitions. And as I move this, you can see the green line on the screen kind of waving and straightening out. And that represents what LRTimelapse is going to adjust our sequence to for correcting for that flickering. And I don't want to make it a straight line. I want to have a little bit of variation because of the cloud movements. I like the idea that as the cloud moves across the sun, as the sun's going down, it's going to create some light complexity through the sequence, and I want to keep that. So about there works for me. We're going to hit apply again, and then save again, and then it's going to regenerate the preview for us, which again is going to take a few minutes. So I'm going to put it on pause, and we'll pick it back up when it's done. And our new round of previews are done after deflickering, so let's see how we did. And as expected, you can see it came out pretty nice. LRTimelapse does a really good job smoothing it all out so we don't have to deal with it manually in Lightroom or in another program. We're going to play that back one more time before moving on to the next step. Just making sure that there's no other adjustments we have to do before moving on to the rendering steps. And yeah, I like that. We're going to call that one good. And we'll hit the save button again because I'm a little anal about it. Close out of that. Go back into Lightroom. And now over here, we're going to go full sequence. And then Control A or Command A on a Mac to select all. And then metadata. Read metadata from files. And this is going to take a minute because it has to read the metadata, the XMP file from all 400 images. And when it's done, we're going to break away from LRTimelapse for the rendering. In the first episode, I showed you how we can use LRTimelapse to render out into video our time-lapse sequence. Typically, I don't use LRTimelapse for the rendering because it doesn't give me enough control. It does an awesome job, don't get me wrong, but for the framing and for the stabilizing, I prefer to use After Effects and then render out in Media Encoder. And why stabilize? I use such a heavy tripod, as we can see, nothing moved. However, I was still adjusting the camera, I was still touching the camera through the shoot. And because of that, there is the likelihood that there is some micro shake that's been introduced into the sequence. And if so, I want to take that out. And I do that in After Effects. So now that everything is red, we're going to do what is essentially a standard photo export with Lightroom. So we'll click on Export. We're going to tell it where to go to. And I've created a folder on the desktop for this stuff. Put it there. That's good. We're going to put it in a subfolder. And we'll call it Episode 2. And we're not going to rename anything. No need to resize. We'll leave on the sharpening for the screen. And then we'll hit export. And again, this is going to take a minute. So I'll put it on pause and pick it up when it's done. And we're back. Now that Lightroom is done exporting our sequence, I have After Effects open. And we'll just grab episode 2 real quick. Drag it into After Effects and it imports that quick. Drop it down here to start a new composition. And there we are there, just the same as it was in After Effects, or I'm sorry, in Lightroom. And now very quick, easy, and simple with our layer highlighted. We click on Warp Stabilizer. We come over here and instead of smooth motion, no motion, and we leave the rest of it set where it is. And it's going to start up, it's going to run in the background, it'll analyze each frame, and then it'll automatically apply and stabilize everything so it's nice and smooth. And this too will take a few minutes, so we'll put it on pause and pick it back up as soon as it's done. And now that the stabilizing is done, we're back. And as I mentioned a couple minutes ago, that because we were touching the camera to adjust the settings, and although I trust my tripod not to budge even in the slight bit, there was a chance for some micro shake being introduced into the sequence. And if we look here at the auto scale, and that represents how much did After Effects scale up the sequence to compensate for the adjusting of the stabilizing. And because it's above 100%, we know that there was at least a very minute degree of microshake. So that's why I use After Effects with every Holy Grail, just to make sure it's 100% stable. So now that we have it here, let's play it back real quick, and you can see it's absolutely rock solid smooth. It doesn't waver, it doesn't shake, there's not even the slightest little bit of vibration being picked up anymore. So we'll stop that. Now we're going to scale it down to our video frame size, which with this one we're going to go with 1080. So with After Effects, Control K or Command K if you're on a Mac, and we're just going to go 1920 by 1080, call it good. And now with our layer selected, press S for scale, and then scale it down until about right there. And now, let's scroll out a little bit. We can adjust up or down by hitting P on the keyboard. And again, this is all artistic. It's all up to the filmmaker at this point to determine how we want it to display. And for me, I'm going to go with right about there. And we'll hit preview real quick. And what I'm looking for right now is how much am I cutting off in the sky by scaling it and framing it. And I'm happy with that. So we'll stop it. Send that back home. Control S to save. And we're going to close this out. I'm going to put it on pause again. And I'm going to open up Media Encoder. And with that, we're going to do our final rendering. And we're back. And now with Media Encoder open, we're just going to simply click and drag our After Effects project into the Q window in Media Encoder. Click on that. We're going to wait for it to open up. This sometimes takes a couple seconds. And again, this may seem like a lot of steps and a lot of work. However, for me and my workflow, this is how I prefer to render out my final sequence. And there we have it here. Click on that, and that's going to open up our settings. And basically, we're going to use a basic YouTube preset, except that I tweak a little bit. And that tweak a little bit is just right here. For YouTube, variable bitrate, 2 pass, and I bump the bitrate up to 16. And this here determines how clean your video, your film, your sequence will display on something like YouTube, Vimeo, Facebook, Twitter, etc., etc. Through my own experimentation, I find that 16-bit works extremely well for me. Output name, now we're going to name it, and we'll just call this one real quick, Episode 2. Click out of that, click Save, come down here, hit OK, and then we just hit play and it'll render out. This will take just a very quick couple minutes. However, I'm still going to put it on pause and we'll pick it back up as soon as it's done. And we're back. And now the Media Encoder is finished up, we can give a playback to see how our film turned out. And yeah, it turned out pretty good. And after a little more tweaking, it turns into this. We just simply add in a little bit of fade in, a little bit of fade out, a little bit of soundtrack, and before you know it, we have a complete time-lapse film. Thanks for joining in and watching. I hope you enjoyed this. Give a thumbs up if you did. Give a thumbs down if you didn't. Tell me what you didn't like about it. Tell me what you did like about it. If these videos have helped you at all, throw a link in the comments. I'd like to see what you're doing with what I'm showing you. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time.